Hello and welcome to New Testament Survey NT 130. My name is Moses Alaman. I will be your professor this semester. I am so excited to be partnering with you in this journey, in your academic journey. I want to let you know, please feel free if you to reach out to me if you have any questions about any of our assignments or anything in general. You can be able to get my email address on the syllabus, and I would love to assist you on this journey. I want you all to succeed, and so please don't hesitate to reach out. Today, what we are going to do is we are going to look at the first few chapters of our textbook, and that is found in Survey of the New Testament by Robert H. Gundry. I know that many of you probably do not have the textbook yet, so I just thought I'd give you just an introductory to some of the chapters at the very beginning. I think our first assignment is in chapter 7, so I'm just giving you some of these previous chapters as an introduction. And so this will be your discussion assignment, okay, that you will turn in. So what I want to do is I want to look at the intertestamental and historical background of the New Testament, okay? When I say intertestamental, what I mean is, I mean the period that is between the Old Testament and the New Testament, all right? I have Old Testament, New Testament, and then in between is the intertestamental period. It's important to know what the background is leading up to the New Testament and all that's happening culturally, politically, nationally, leading up to the New Testament, okay? And so if you know anything about the Bible, you know the Old Testament was the recording of the spiritual failures of Israel. There was a lot of great things that happened, a lot of good things that happened, but there was also a lot of failure. Israel was in this pattern where they would do good and obey the commands and follow what God had called them to do, fulfill their part of the covenant, and then they would disobey. They would default back and do things in whatever they thought was right in their own eyes. Right? And because of years and generations of that, it finally led to consequences, and they became captive. It led to captivity because of their failure to obey and sin. Okay? And so now what we're going to do is we're going to jump to the first nation that came to power. All right, and this, the first two nations, Babylon and Persia, we see at the end of the Old Testament. All right, we see them in books like Daniel, Esther, Malachi, Ezekiel, Ezra, Nehemiah. All right, we see these nations that came to power. But then nations like Greece and Rome, we see in the intertestamental period. We don't see them necessarily in the Bible, necessarily, okay? So here we go. So we're going to look at the Babylonian period, right? Judah was the one tribe of Israel that was left. And because of their sin and failure to obey God, the Babylonians took captive the nation of Judah or Israel, okay? I'm going to call them interchangeably, right? Nebuchadnezzar, a crazy name. He's the leader of the Babylonian empire, overran Judah in 605. Okay, Nebuchadnezzar allowed Judah to maintain a king, even though they were captive to them for about 20 years. And then after those 20 years, Israel revolted against Babylon. They wanted to regain their power and their independence, which resulted in three things. Number one, destruction of the temple, okay, which is a big deal. That was their place of worship. Number two was destruction of their capital city or city of David, Jerusalem. And number three, the Jews were allowed to stay in their land, but because of this revolt, they were deported now to Babylon, okay? So they had to leave their land, which is a big deal. Babylon dominated for the next 50 years, a total of about 70 years, give or take. And then the next nation came in, okay? And this led us to the Persian period, all right? The Persian period is from about 539 to 331. It's a pretty lengthy period, okay? In 539 BC, the Persians and their allies dominated world domination over Babylon, okay? They took over Babylon. Years later, a king named Cyrus, the Persian king, he allowed the Jews to return to their land and rebuild their temple in Jerusalem. So he was a friendly king to the Jews. Okay, prophets and books of the Bible like Haggai, Zechariah, Ezra, and Malachi provided spiritual and governing guidance to the people of Israel as they were in their land. Okay. This now leads to the Greek period. Okay. The Greek period in 331 to 143 BC. I apologize for the sound effects in the background. I don't know if you hear that or not. I'm just waiting for this automobile to drive by. All right, so in the Greek period, 331 to 143 BC, Alexander the Great. Okay, so we have the Babylonians, then we have the Persians, then Alexander, this guy named Alexander the Great, led victory over the Persian army. All right, and what he brought was a lot of things, but mainly was Hellenism. That word Hellenism. Basically, Hellenism is Greek culture. Greek culture permeated life everywhere. All right, they were the world domination. So just think about the world at that time in that area was dominated, saturated with Hellenism, Greek culture. And the second thing is Greek language became the language of the common man. Okay, and so everybody spoke. If you were trading with nations, right? If you were in business with other groups or nations or people, you may have spoken Greek to them, okay, because that was the language, almost like English is today, okay. Even in the New Testament, I'm going to get to the Romans now, but even though the Romans were dominating in the New Testament, they were the dominant power that led up to the New Testament. Greek culture and Hellenism still permeated the New Testament in all areas of it, okay. Alexander the Great died in 323 BC with no heir. The kingdom was divided amongst his 4 generals, okay? So much happened between the Greek and the Roman conquest, right? The Romans came and took over the Greeks. In that time, I'm going to give you the nutshell version of what happened. The 4 generals, there's 2 generals that are important. One of the generals was not good to the Jews, and he brought his own priest and made him priest of the Jews from his culture. He ransacked the temple, and he even sacrificed a pig, a sow, on their altar, which was just devastating, right, to the Jewish religion. And so they revolted. Basically, they finally, after years, took over this general called the Seleucid Empire, right? That came from this one general, Hasmonean period. And in that civil war, Rome was able to come in and they brought peace to that civil war, okay? They became now in 63 BC the dominant world power. They were massive. Their kingdom was just huge. It spread across the ancient Near East. One of these guys named Antipater rose to power. He wasn't even a Jew. He wasn't really a Roman. He was an Idumean from this nation, and he rose to power in the middle of the Jewish civil war, and he was able to gain favor with the Romans, and he basically and his sons became the power or the king over the Jews, okay? He became the rule over the Jews, okay? And we know them as the Herods, okay? Antipater was the father, and Herod the Great became the first king of the Jews in the New Testament. We see his name everywhere. We see it in the birth narrative in Matthew and Luke, but he was able to place his sons in power. Okay, so here's our recap. The Babylonian period, 605 to 539. The Persian period, 539 to 331. And these 2 periods, we still see them in the Old Testament. Then we move to the Greek period, and this is kind of intertestamental, 331 to 143. Hasmonean period is the period I told you where the Jews were able to establish rule and conquer the Seleucids and gain independence. And then Roman basically is from 63 BC to the New Testament. And this leads us up to the setting and the background of the New Testament. All right. Thank you.